Human blood splattered the cramped cockpit as Stephen Foster's starfighter smashed into the craggy landscape of Zorthak, skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust. Belos, a scrawny Talaxian adolescent, crept from the shadows of a nearby cavern, eyes wide at the crumpled metal wreckage. His three-fingered hand brushed the human's face, surprised to feel warm skin instead of cold steel. Stephen Foster was barely conscious, his battered body slowly knitting itself back together, thanks to his enhanced human physiology and the trillions of gene-tweaked nanobots swarming through his bloodstream. The human coughed, a glob of crimson blood splattering Belos's mottled brown skin. "Please don't kill me," Belos stammered, flinching away. His bulbous black eyes darted left and right, watching for other villagers. Foster couldn't reply, blood gurgling from his mouth. The human's eyelids fluttered shut as his body plunged into a coma, repairing itself. Belos glanced back at the nearby village, a collection of primitive mud huts cowering in the shadow of a towering clay butte. He knew the elders would never approve of his actions, but something deep inside told Belos he had to help this creature, the first visitor to their forgotten planet in generations. The young Talaxian wrapped his bony arms around Stephen's bulk, heaving with all his might. He slowly dragged the limp human into the recesses of his cavern, away from prying eyes. Belos laid the human on a bed of soft moss and began tending to his wounds, waiting for him to wake up. In the darkness of space above Zorthak, a sinister spaceship decloaked, bristling with jagged spines and crackling with energy. Inside the ship, Krazak warriors snarled and howled, slathering at the prospect of hunting the weak flesh creatures on the planet below. The towering wolf-like aliens loaded their weapons and boarded drop pods, ready to launch a vicious raid on the vulnerable Talaxian villages scattered across the surface. The balance of power on Zorthak was about to shift forever as the weakest species in the galaxy took their first steps towards becoming the strongest warbeasts the Krazak had ever seen. The human soldier would forge the Talaxians into a devastating new fighting force, if they could survive the brutal onslaught to come. Word of the Talaxians' stunning victory over the brutal Krazak spread like wildfire across Zorthak. In the days that followed, a steady stream of Talaxians from far-flung villages made the trek to Belos's cavern, each one pleading for help against their oppressors. Stephen sat on a flat boulder outside the cavern, listening intently as a group of Talaxian elders recounted tales of Krazak raids, enslaved families, and relentless brutality. The human soldier's brow furrowed as he realized the true scale of the task before them. "Belos, we can't do this alone," Stephen said, turning to his Talaxian companion. "We need more humans, more weapons, more everything." Belos nodded, his bulbous eyes glinting with determination. "What do you suggest, Stephen?" The human paused for a moment, then tapped a button on his wrist communicator. "Mike, it's Stephen. I need a favor, and you're not going to like it." A week later, a battered human freighter landed near the cavern, kicking up clouds of red dust. Mike Donovan, a grizzled ex-Marine with a cybernetic arm, emerged from the ship, followed by a dozen crates of decommissioned human weapons and training equipment. "You owe me big time for this, Foster," Mike grumbled, clasping Stephen's hand in a firm shake. Together, Stephen and Mike set up a makeshift training camp in a secluded valley, far from prying eyes. Talaxian volunteers, young and old, flocked to the camp, eager to learn from the human warriors. Stephen and Mike drilled the Talaxians relentlessly, teaching them advanced combat techniques, teamwork strategies, and how to maintain and operate the human weapons. Belos, now Stephen's trusted second-in-command, worked tirelessly to bridge the cultural gap between the humans and Talaxians, adapting the training to suit the Talaxians' unique physiology and environment. As the weeks turned into months, the ranks of the Talaxian warbeasts swelled. Armed with human weapons and tactics, they began to strike back against the Krazak, liberating enslaved Talaxians and establishing a network of free colonies across Zorthak. But their actions did not go unnoticed. In the gleaming halls of the Galactic Council, a powerful alliance of advanced alien races, news of the Talaxian uprising sowed fear and unease. "This cannot be allowed to continue," a hooded figure rasped, its voice echoing through the council chamber. "The Talaxians are a primitive, subservient race. They must not be permitted to rise above their station." The council members murmured in agreement, and a decision was made. A sleek silver ship bearing the emblem of the Galactic Council slipped into orbit around Zorthak. A diplomatic envoy, flanked by heavily armed guards, descended to the planet's surface, intent on confronting Stephen and his Talaxian army. The envoy strode into the Talaxian camp, its metallic skin glinting in the harsh sunlight. Stephen and Belos emerged from a makeshift command center, their expressions guarded as they approached the delegation. "Stephen Foster of Earth," the envoy intoned, its voice cold and metallic. "The Galactic Council demands that you and your Talaxian followers stand down immediately. Your actions have upset the delicate balance of power in this region, and we cannot allow it to continue. If you do not comply, you will face the full might of the Council's military forces." Stephen's jaw tightened as he stared into the envoy's unblinking, robotic eyes. He knew that the Talaxians' fight for freedom had just become a lot more complicated, and the stakes had never been higher. Stephen's fists clenched as a sleek silver ship descended from the sky, the emblem of the Galactic Council emblazoned on its hull. As the ship touched down, a ramp lowered, and a tall, slender figure emerged, flanked by a phalanx of heavily armed guards. "I am Zorel, envoy of the Galactic Council," the alien announced, his voice smooth and cold. "I demand an audience with the human Stephen Foster and the leaders of the Talaxian resistance." Stephen stepped forward, his jaw set. "I'm Stephen Foster. What do you want?" Zorel's eyes narrowed. "Your actions have destabilized this region and threatened the peace. The Council cannot allow this to continue." "The Talaxians have the right to defend themselves," Stephen shot back. "They've been oppressed and enslaved for too long. We're fighting for their freedom." "The Council's laws must be respected," Zorel countered. "You have no authority here." As the two leaders argued, tensions rose among the gathered Talaxians and Council guards. Belos stepped forward, trying to calm the situation, but Zorel ignored him. "I see now that negotiation is futile," Zorel said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You leave us no choice." With a gesture from Zorel, the Council's warships opened fire, raining down a barrage of laser blasts and plasma bombs on the Talaxian colonies. The ground shook as buildings crumbled and fires erupted across the landscape. "Fall back!" Stephen shouted, grabbing Belos and dragging him towards the mountains. "We can't fight them head-on!" As the Talaxians fled, the Council's forces advanced, their superior technology and numbers overwhelming the resistance. Stephen, Mike, and Belos led the remnants of their army into the mountains, taking shelter in caves and hidden valleys. "We need a new strategy," Mike said, poring over a holographic map of the region. "We can't beat them in a straight fight." "Guerrilla tactics," Stephen said, his eyes hardening. "Hit and run, disrupt their supply lines, take out their communications." For weeks, the Talaxians waged a desperate campaign against the Council's forces, striking from the shadows and fading away before the enemy could retaliate. But they were losing ground, and they knew it. "We need an edge," Belos said, his voice tight with frustration. "Something to level the playing field." It was then that they learned of a Council research outpost, hidden deep in the mountains. In a daring raid, they infiltrated the facility, fighting their way through layers of security and automated defenses. What they found inside left them stunned. Row upon row of stasis pods, each containing a Talaxian in various stages of metamorphosis. The Council had been experimenting with Talaxian DNA, blending it with the genetic material of other species, to create a new breed of super-soldier. "My God," Stephen whispered, his face pale. "What have they done?" Stephen reeled back from the sight of the mutated Talaxians floating in the stasis pods, rage and disgust burning in his gut. He slammed a fist against the nearest console, cracking the screen. "Those Council bastards," he snarled, "experimenting on innocent people like lab rats." "We have to expose this," Belos said, his voice shaking with anger. "The galaxy needs to know the truth about the Council's crimes." Mike nodded grimly. "I've got an idea. The Council's main communications hub is on their capital worlds, or axis. If we can infiltrate the facility and broadcast the evidence—" "It'll be like lighting a match in a powder keg," Stephen finished. "Inspire uprisings on every oppressed world." They gathered their team and set their plan in motion. Aided by a network of rebel spies, they slipped past the Council's defenses and fought their way into the heavily guarded communications complex. Alarms blared, and energy bolts sizzled through the air as Stephen and his squad battled the Council's elite guards. "Belos, get that data uploaded now!" Stephen roared over the chaos, firing his pulse rifle at the oncoming enemies. Belos's fingers flew over the console, his face taut with concentration. Almost there. With a final keystroke, the truth exploded across the galaxy. Holograms sprang to life on countless worlds, displaying the horrific images of the Council's twisted experiments. The Talaxian story of oppression and defiance spread like a virus, igniting the spark of rebellion in the hearts of billions. Seizing the moment, the Talaxian Warbeasts struck hard and fast. Aided by their new allies, they launched devastating raids on Council shipyards, supply depots, and command centers. The Council's forces, caught off guard and overwhelmed, crumbled under the onslaught. On Zoraxis, Stephen and his team fought their way into the Council's grand citadel, a towering spire of gleaming metal. They burst into the central chamber, weapons drawn, to confront Zor-El and the Council's cowering leaders. "It's over," Stephen declared, his voice ringing with authority. "The Talaxians and every other species you've oppressed demand freedom and justice. Surrender now." Zor-El sneered, his eyes glinting with madness. "You think you've won, human? You've only sealed your doom." With a gesture, Zor-El summoned a legion of genetically enhanced Talaxian super-soldiers, their bodies rippling with unnatural muscle and bristling with cybernetic implants. The Council's secret weapon, the twisted fruits of their vile experiments, surged forward to crush the rebels. But Stephen and his allies had a surprise of their own. From the shadows, a second force emerged, the liberated test subjects from the Council's labs, now fighting alongside their Talaxian brethren for freedom. The battle was joined, a writhing mass of flesh and steel, the screams of the wounded mingling with the clash of weapons. Stephen and Mike fought back to back, their movements fluid and precise, cutting down the enemy with ruthless efficiency. Belos led the charge of the Talaxian Warbeasts, his battle cry rising above the din. The Talaxians fought with the strength of a people who had endured generations of oppression, fueled by the unbreakable spirit of humanity. The tide turned, the Council's forces falling back under the relentless assault. Zor-El, his face twisted with rage and disbelief, fled deeper into the citadel, his loyal guards falling one by one. Stephen and his team pursued, cornering the once mighty envoy in his inner sanctum. Zor-El, his robes tattered and his face streaked with blood, sank to his knees, his eyes wide with terror. "Please," he whimpered, his voice cracking. "Mercy." Stephen's grip tightened on his weapon, the temptation to end the miserable creature's life almost overwhelming, but a hand on his shoulder stayed his wrath. Belos, his face battered, but his eyes shining with hope, shook his head. "No more death," the Talaxian said softly. "Let him face justice for his crimes. Let the galaxy see the Council's true face." Stephen nodded, lowering his gun. He stepped forward, towering over the cowering envoy. "Zor-El of the Galactic Council, I hereby place you under arrest for crimes against sentience. You and your masters will answer for what you've done." As Zor-El was dragged away in chains, and the last pockets of resistance were subdued, a hush fell over the citadel. The leaders of a dozen worlds, the once oppressed species now standing tall and proud, gathered to witness the historic moment. Stephen, Mike, and Belos stood before them, their armor scorched and their faces weary but triumphant. The war was over, the Talaxians were free, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the days that followed, a new order emerged. The Galactic Council, its crimes laid bare for all to see, was dismantled, its members tried and sentenced for their atrocities. In its place, a new alliance was forged, a union of equals, dedicated to freedom, justice, and the rights of all sentient beings. The Talaxians, once the weakest and most oppressed species in the galaxy, now stood as an example of strength and resilience. Their story, and the story of the humans who had fought beside them, would be told and retold for generations to come. And on a distant world, in a quiet moment amid the celebrations and the rebuilding, Stephen and Belos stood side by side, gazing up at the stars. "Thank you," Belos said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for believing in us, for making us more than what we were." Stephen smiled, clasping his friend's shoulder. "You did that yourselves. We just helped you find the strength that was always there." Together they looked to the future, to the challenges and the triumphs that lay ahead. For in the hearts of the Talaxians, and in the unbreakable bond between two species, lay the promise of a better tomorrow. A tomorrow where the weak would never again fear the strong, and where the light of hope would never be extinguished. As the dust settled on the shattered remains of the Galactic Council's citadel, Stephen Foster and Mike Donovan stood shoulder to shoulder with their Talaxian allies, surveying the aftermath of their hard-fought victory. The once pristine halls now lay in ruins, a testament to the fierce battle that had raged within. Belos, his face streaked with grime and blood, limped towards his human friends, a weary smile on his lips. "We did it," he rasped, clasping Stephen's hand in a firm grip. "The Talaxians are free, thanks to you." Stephen shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No, Belos, you did this, your people did this. We just helped you find the strength that was always there." In the days that followed, the true scope of the Talaxians' triumph became clear. Across the galaxy, oppressed species rose up against their masters, inspired by the tale of a once-weak race that had overthrown an empire. The Talaxians, once dismissed as primitive and subservient, now stood as a shining example of courage and resilience. Stephen and Mike, hailed as heroes by the grateful Talaxians, worked tirelessly to forge a new galactic order. They helped negotiate treaties and alliances, ensuring that every species had the right to self-determination and protection from exploitation. But even as they celebrated their victory, the weight of their losses hung heavy on their hearts. Too many had fallen in the struggle for freedom, brave Talaxians who had fought and died alongside them, their sacrifices forever etched in memory. Amidst the bittersweet aftermath, Belos stepped forward to lead his people into a new era. No longer the scrawny, frightened youth who had dragged Stephen from the wreckage of his starfighter, he now stood tall and proud, a seasoned warrior and a visionary leader. As Stephen and Mike prepared to return to Earth, their mission complete, an urgent distress call shattered their brief moment of peace. A holographic image flickered to life, revealing a haggard alien face contorted in fear. "Please, you must help us," the alien pleaded, its voice cracking with desperation. "The Zyrthax, they're here." Stephen and Mike exchanged a grim look, the name sending a chill down their spines. The Zyrthax, a race of parasitic beings whispered of in the darkest corners of the galaxy, capable of infecting and controlling other species. Even the Galactic Council had feared them, their very existence a closely guarded secret. As the transmission continued, the horrible truth unfolded. The Zyrthax had been the true puppet masters behind the Council's experiments, seeking to create the perfect host bodies for their insidious purposes. Now, with the Council's fall, they had emerged from the shadows to claim their prize. Stephen's jaw clenched as he realized the implications. The Talaxians, with their unique genetic adaptability and newly forged strength, would be a prime target for the Zyrthax's twisted designs. With heavy hearts, the two humans bid farewell to Belos and the Talaxians, the bond between them unbreakable. "If you ever need us, we'll be there," Stephen promised, clasping his friend's hand one last time. As their ship lifted off from Zorthak's surface, Stephen and Mike knew that their fight was far from over. The Zyrthax loomed on the horizon, a threat unlike any they had faced before. But they also knew that the legacy they had forged with the Talaxians would endure, a beacon of hope in a galaxy forever changed. The Talaxians, once the weakest of the weak, now stood as warriors and hunters, ready to defend their hard-won freedom against any foe. And the humans who had fought beside them, the heroes who had helped them find their strength, would stand with them once more, united against the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.